When we think about a ring topology, ring design, we think about a logical ring. So it looks like a ring on paper. But when we lay it out physically, we actually go into a room and say, hey, look, there's all those computers. We're not playing duck, duck, goose. We're not going to see everybody sitting in a circle. What we're going to see instead is we're going to see a physical topology, a physical design, where people probably look and act and seem to be laid out the way they would normally, where they're sitting at desks randomly placed around the room. But logically, the connection is going to be in a ring. So we refer to this as a ring topology. And you'll see we have workstations, maybe a server. This is a printer in theory, right? And so the idea is they're all connected to the ring. And as long as they're on and transmitting, this workstation over here can get to either this workstation to share files and exchange information, or this printer to do the same thing, or this server to do the same thing, or this printer. But the secret with a ring is that we have to know what direction the ring is what we call initialized in, or what direction the ring transmits information in. It can go in one of two directions. It's a circle. It runs forwards or backwards. There's not a lot of mystery there. We say forwards going this way is clockwise. Backwards, the other way, would be counterclockwise. So we initialize the ring when we set it up, we say it's going to either run clockwise or counterclockwise. Based on that, we then can say that this workstation sitting up here in theory, if we use the clock analogy, at the 12 o'clock spot on the clock, can either transmit to the right down to the printer at the 3 o'clock spot if we're running clockwise, then to the 6 o'clock spot to the server, then to the 9 o'clock spot to the other workstation. Or if it's running counterclockwise, it goes the other way, right? So this workstation could transmit to the 9 o'clock position, going counterclockwise, and then down to the server, and you get the idea. So the idea would be if this workstation was on a clockwise ring and it wanted to be able to send to this server down here, it would have to send this way in order to get there. It could not go this way because the ring runs clockwise. We can only go the way the ring transmits. And we have to have what's known as a token, a little identifier that we have to have control of in the ring in order to be able to send and receive. We refer to those rings by a special name. We call them token rings. The topology of token ring is a ring that has a token that uniquely identifies you. It's like a permission slip that says, I have the right to transmit. And when you hold the token, you get to transmit, you get to send and receive. When you're done, you release the token goes floating around the ring until somebody else grabs it and says, I want to transmit. And then they have the right to transmit. So a token is going to be the identifier that lets you transmit inside the ring topology. But the ring itself is a logical ring. You just want to remember that. Remember that it's initialized either clockwise or counterclockwise. When we think about a mesh topology, we think about yet another way to connect machines together. This can look like a spider web. It's another great way of thinking about it. It's often referred to as a web or a mesh. And the idea is that every machine, every endpoint, is connected to every other by at least one connection. So you can see here, if we look at this machine, or maybe it's easier probably to do the one in the middle. It's very obvious. So the one in the middle is connected out here, 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 and here. So it touches every machine. And every machine is connected to it by at least one connection as well. Overlapping connections that allow us to have paths to communicate. If I want to get to this machine right here, I could go directly from this machine. I could also go up here and come down here in case this connection point was broken for some reason. We have redundant connections. In case one path is down, I can take another path to get there. Go this way as well in theory. So I have more than one way to get to any point on the compass here. This is what a mesh is. Redundant overlapping connections that allow me to be able to touch everything in the system. The issue with a mesh topology is, while it's very well connected, and so very unlikely you're going to be able to lose connectivity and not be able to talk to something, the downside here is, of course, that it is going to be very expensive because we're laying in multiple redundant connections for everything. And in addition, it's very complicated. It doesn't scale very well because for every system you add in, you're adding in multiple connections to all the other systems, and it becomes very complex to manage and very complex to ultimately be able to scale with very large numbers of machines. So while we do see mesh topologies, we tend to see them in smaller implementations for very specific areas or parts of networks that need high levels of redundancy. We don't see it generically for thousands of machines all all interacting together just because somebody thought it was a good idea. Right? If that's the case, then it's going to be very, very difficult to implement. So we tend to see meshes with very small systems. Just keep that in mind. We also have a star topology. This is going to be the one that we're probably most familiar with because this is the one that we use all the time, where multiple devices, laptops, desktops, whatever they may be, are all connected out to a central connection device called the switch, traditionally. And that switch is going to have ports on it. We can kind of make out the ports. These little black connection points on the front or back of the device are what the switch ports are going to be. And we use a cable to connect up, or we wirelessly connect up. And every traffic, or all the traffic that goes through for the switch for all those devices, is going to be able to interact with each other. So a laptop sitting over here, as long as it's connected to the switch and the other devices are connected and powered on, they're going to be able to communicate with each other because they're all on the same system. They're all interconnecting through the device. So that's going to be important. As long as the device stays up, then any of the machines connected to it are going to be able to interact and connect. If I shut off this machine over here, all these others are still able to connect and talk through the device with no trouble. If I shut off the switch, however, all these devices, even though they stay on, are going to be isolated. They're not going to be able to talk to each other because the central switch, or the place where they exchange information, has effectively gone dark. There's no way to do that. So we do want to understand that and be aware of that. We often these days, with our Ethernet networking, our copper wire-based networking, or wireless-based networks that we use, we see star topologies deployed. This is really the standard mechanism, standard design topology we use for everything in the world today. What we actually see more often than not is not just a star, but a special kind of star called a star bus, a hybrid of the star and the bus. Because what we'll do is we'll actually add the bus line in on the back here to link different switches together, so that if we have, let's say, this little network right here, and then maybe if we reproduce this and say over here, there's another one of these, but it's isolated, they're not connected, then what we'd want to do is connect these two switches together, and we would use a bus line to do that. We'd run a little line between the two switches. The switch has an uplink port on it, typically one or more. You would plug in the Ethernet cable to the uplink port on one switch, plug it into the uplink port on the other switch on the other side. That line becomes the bus line, the dedicated path, right, the route that moves information between the two switches, allowing us to link the two stars together, creating a star bus topology, a hybrid topology. And that's what we actually are going to see. It's the most common kind of topology or design we see today. So just be aware of that and be thinking about that as we think about the different design elements that we're looking at.